Arizona Territory, June 1883. The sun was high, and the desert was already trying to kill her. Isaiah Fletcher spotted her first from the saddle. Just a pale blur moving slow across the cracked earth, maybe half a mile from the fence he was mending. He narrowed his eyes, tugging the brim of his hat lower. At first he thought it was a mirage, but then she stumbled and stayed down. He kicked his boot into his gelding side and rode hard. By the time he reached her, she was face down in the dirt, her dress heavy with sweat and dust, her bonnet hanging by a string around her neck. He dropped from the saddle and hurried to her side, heart pounding. "Miss," he asked, crouching. "Can you hear me?" She flinched at his voice, then tried to lift her head. Her lips were cracked, dirt clinging to her face. "Water," she rasped. Isaiah pulled his canteen loose and tipped it carefully to her mouth. She drank fast, desperate, and coughed. He gave her more, slower this time. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. She blinked up at him, dazed. "West. My horse died 2 days ago." Isaiah's stomach dropped. "You walked in this heat?" "I had to." She started to push herself up, but her legs gave out. He caught her before she hit the ground again. "All right." "You are coming with me," he said. "You will die out here if I leave you." "I am not," she started, but the fight drained out of her. Her head dropped against his chest. He lifted her into the saddle and held her steady as he led the horse back toward the ranch. The sun beat down hard, but they moved quicker than he had dared alone. Back at the Fletcher place, he helped her down and guided her into the bunkhouse, the only place with a spare bed and some shade. She slept close to 20 hours. Isaiah checked on her every few, made sure she had water within arm's reach, kept the door cracked for air. When she finally woke, he was sitting just outside the bunkhouse with a cup of coffee in his hands. Her voice floated through the open door. "Where am I?" He stood and stepped inside. She was sitting up on the cot, blinking at the light. "You are safe," he said. "This is the Fletcher Ranch. I work here." She looked around, dazed. "You brought me here?" "I did." She stared at him for a long moment. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once. "What is your name?" "Willa Ashford." He removed his hat. "Isaiah Fletcher, you gave me a hell of a scare out there." Willa smiled faintly. "I scared myself worse." He pulled over a chair and sat, watching her sip from the cup of water he handed her. Her hands trembled. "You said you lost your horse," he said, "but where were you headed?" She looked down. "East. I came from California. I was trying to get to New Mexico." "That is a long ride." "I know." Isaiah studied her face. She looked young, maybe 25, but there was something in her eyes that felt older. "Worn? You were traveling alone," Willa hesitated. "Not exactly." She shifted on the cot and reached into her satchel. From inside, she pulled something wrapped in a faded quilt. She laid it gently in her lap. Isaiah watched as she peeled back the cloth to reveal a baby no more than a few weeks old, sleeping soundly. His chest tightened. "This is my daughter," Willa said, her voice low. "Her name is Hope." Isaiah stared at the tiny face, pink and warm against her mother's skin. He had not expected that. "I could not stay where I was," Willa added. "Hope, she was not wanted by the man I thought I could trust." Isaiah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He looked at Hope again. Her little hand twitched in her sleep. "I had to leave," Willa said. "I had nowhere else to go, but I had to try." Isaiah nodded slowly. "You did the right thing." Willa's eyes filled, but she blinked fast. "I was not sure I would survive, not after my horse collapsed. I thought we would die out there." Isaiah looked at her, really looked. Dust still clung to her lashes and her dress was torn at the hem, but she had not given up. She had walked through the desert to save her daughter. "You are safe now," he said. "You and Hope. You can stay here for as long as you need." Willa's voice caught. "I do not have money. I cannot repay you. I do not want your money." She watched him closely. "Why would you help me?" Isaiah looked down at his hands, rough with calluses. "Because someone should have." She said nothing. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. "I will get you some food," he said quietly, rising to his feet, "and something clean to wear." Willa nodded, her arms wrapped around her baby. "Thank you, Isaiah." He stepped outside and leaned against the post, exhaling slow, "Hope." He had not expected her, but the name sat heavy in his mind. It was not just a name, it was a reason. Later that evening, Willa sat on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders, Hope asleep in her arms. Isaiah stood a few feet away, watching the sun dip low across the desert. The sky turned orange, then purple. "It is beautiful," Willa whispered. Isaiah glanced at her. "It is." She looked down at Hope, then back at him. "I thought I would never see another sunset again." Isaiah swallowed hard. "You almost didn't." She looked up at him. "But you found me," he met her eyes. "Yeah," he said. "I did." And for the first time in a long while, Isaiah Fletcher felt like maybe something good had found him too. By the following morning, Willa had found her legs again. She stood barefoot just outside the bunkhouse, her daughter against her chest wrapped in a shawl Isaiah's sister had left behind last spring. The morning air still held a chill, despite the desert's usual heat. She watched the wind shift through the greasewood, the stillness broken only by the sharp cry of a hawk overhead. Isaiah approached from the corral, leading a mare with a stiff gait. "This one needs walking. Thought you might like the company." Willa glanced at the mare, then at him. "She's limping. Thorn in her frog. I dug most of it out, but she's favoring that leg. She could use an easy walk, nothing fast." Willa nodded once. "I can do that." Isaiah passed her the reins, his hand brushing hers without intention. She didn't flinch, and neither of them remarked on it. "You ever work with horses?" he asked, stepping back. "My pa bred Morgans in Sonoma," she said, adjusting Hope's position across her shoulder. "I spent more time in the barn than the kitchen." Isaiah gave a short nod. "Explains you're calm." Willa led the mare toward the south fence, her steps slow and even. Hope stirred once but didn't wake. Isaiah watched them go, hands loose at his sides. By midday, she'd brought the mare back, and Isaiah was inside the small shed sorting tools. Willa stood in the doorway, arms folded. "You live here alone?" "No," he said without looking up. "Boss lives in the big house on the ridge. I keep to myself unless he needs extra hands." She stepped in, eyeing the rows of neatly hung bridles and hammers. "You always this tidy," he set aside a rasp. "Wasn't once. Then I came back from the war with a head full of noise. Found out if I kept my hands busy and the place in order, the noise didn't win." Willa leaned against the door frame. "You fought, 2nd Kansas Colored Infantry." "Joined up when I was 16, lied about my age." She didn't speak right away. "Then my brother enlisted too. He didn't come back." Isaiah met her eyes. "Mine did, but he came back different. And you?" "I came back with a spine full of shrapnel and a mind that didn't sleep right. Took 3 years before I could sit through a thunderstorm without grabbing for a rifle." Willa stepped closer. "I'm sorry," he shook his head. "Don't be, I'm breathing. That's more than some got." They stood in the quiet of the shed, surrounded by the smell of leather and worn wood. Willa glanced at the cot in the corner. "That where you sleep? When I'm not out on the line, bunkhouse is yours now, safer for the baby." She hesitated. "I don't expect you to keep putting yourself out." "You're not," he said. "I'm choosing to." Her throat worked around a word she didn't say. She shifted Hope to her other hip. "She's hungry, I'll go feed her." Isaiah nodded once. "Take your time." That evening the wind picked up, carrying the scent of creosote and dust. Isaiah came back from checking the north water trough and found Willa sitting on the porch steps, Hope asleep again in a basket beside her. She was mending a tear along her sleeve with thread he'd brought her from Benson. He sat beside her, boots scuffing the dry wood. "You sew like a woman who's done it 1,000 times." "I have," she said. "My mother used to say a woman should know how to fix what she wears, grow what she eats, and leave before a man tries to take more than she offers." Isaiah looked at her, the line of her jaw set firm. "She sounds like she knew the world. She died when I was 15, but I still hear her when I'm trying to decide if I'm doing the right thing." He leaned back on his elbows. "What does she say about being here?" Willa glanced at him, then at her daughter. "She'd say I landed somewhere decent. That not every man with calloused hands is dangerous." Isaiah didn't smile, but something in his face eased. "I'm not in the habit of taking in strangers. I'm not in the habit of accepting help." They sat in silence as the first stars came out. Hope stirred once, then settled. You planning on moving on? Isaiah asked. I don't know, she said. I need steady ground before I can think that far ahead. Well, he said, voice steady, this place doesn't rush anybody. A coyote called in the distance. Willa wrapped her arms around her knees and looked up at the sky. Do you believe life gives you second chances? She asked. He considered that a long time. No, he said finally, but I believe in new ones. She looked over at him, something unreadable in her eyes. I think I do too, she said. Hope sighed in her sleep, and the desert settled into its own kind of peace. The morning after a rare summer rain, Isaiah found Willa kneeling in the narrow garden behind the bunkhouse, sleeves rolled, fingers deep in the damp soil. Hope lay tucked in a shallow basket nearby, shaded by a canvas flap Isaiah had rigged between two stakes the night before. You planting? He asked, stepping around the corner with a tin mug half full of chicory brew. She sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her skirt. Trying to. There's wild mustard near the creek I gathered seed before the rain came. Might take root if the ground stays soft a while. He passed her the mug. You know what you're doing. Enough to coax a few things out of the earth. Not enough to feed 2 people through a dry season, though. Isaiah crouched beside her, eyeing the loose rows she'd drawn with a stick. We could set a few tin sheets by the well, catch runoff when it storms again. She sipped the drink and nodded. That'd help, I don't need much. Just enough to feel like I'm building something, not just hiding. Isaiah let the silence sit, then asked, You ever live on open land before? Not like this. My father believed fences kept order, even strung wire through the orchard rows. Her mouth twitched faintly. He didn't trust what he couldn't count. Isaiah watched Hope's small hand curl over the edge of the blanket. And you, I trust what endures. She met his gaze, even if it's hard to measure. A gust lifted the canvas slightly, and Isaiah steadied it with a flat palm. I've got a few potato eyes in the shed. Been meaning to put them down since March. I'd be glad to help. They worked side by side for the rest of the morning, quiet but not distant. Willa's hands moved with practiced care, her sleeves damp to the elbow. Isaiah fetched a short-handled spade from the shed and dug beside her, careful not to disturb the baby's rest. When Hope stirred, Willa paused to nurse her beneath the linen shawl she kept knotted at her waist. Later, while Willa rinsed the dirt from her arms at the pump, Isaiah walked the fence line with his toolbox. A broken rail on the southern edge had been worrying him since last week. He'd just begun replacing it when he heard hoofbeats a single rider coming in from the west, slow and steady. He stepped back from the post, hammer in hand, as the man approached. He wore a travel-stained coat and rode a chestnut with a scar down its flank. Isaiah didn't recognize him, but he caught the glint of a pistol under the coat's flap. The man reined in a few yards off. You Isaiah Fletcher? I am. He didn't dismount. You had a woman come through here last week, said she was traveling alone with an infant. Isaiah kept his stance easy. That right? She's got something belongs to me. Isaiah didn't blink. What would that be, my child? The hammer stayed at Isaiah's side, but his grip shifted slightly. You got proof of that. I don't owe proof to a hired man. Isaiah stepped forward once. You do if you're asking after a woman under my roof. The man's jaw twitched. She run off with my daughter. Left in the night, didn't tell no one. Isaiah studied him. You her husband? No, then you got no claim, not here. The man's hand hovered near his holster. You planning to stand between me and my flesh and blood? Isaiah didn't raise his voice. I'm saying if that child's yours, you'd have come sooner, and you'd know her name. The man's mouth opened, but no answer came. Isaiah stepped closer. Don't ride onto Fletcher land throwing weight you don't have. You want to talk, you do it with respect. The man stared at him a moment longer, then pulled the reins and turned his horse. She can't hide forever. Isaiah watched him leave, the dust curling behind the retreating hooves. He didn't move until the rider was a speck on the trail west. That evening, as the sky burned low behind the hills, he told Willa what happened. She didn't cry. Her mouth went still, her hands folding in her lap. He wasn't there for the birth, she said. Didn't ask if I lived or died. Just said I'd ruined his reputation and should disappear. Isaiah sat beside her on the porch, arms resting on his knees. He won't try again soon. Men like that want easy victories. She exhaled slowly. I don't want to keep running. You won't have to. She looked at him, the last light catching in her hair. Why do you do this? Why risk yourself for people you barely know? Isaiah didn't answer right away. When I was in Kansas, he said, I saw men turn their backs on things they should have stood for, said it wasn't their fight. I promised myself if I could carry something right, I would. Willa reached out, fingers brushing his. You are. Their hands stayed there, neither pulling back. Inside, Hope stirred and whimpered. Willa rose to tend her but paused at the door. You were right. Isaiah looked up. About what? She doesn't cry like him. She doesn't carry his name. She's mine. Her voice softened. And maybe she's yours too. If you want her. She disappeared into the bunkhouse and Isaiah sat alone on the porch, the stars bright overhead, his pulse steady in a way it hadn't been in years. Isaiah woke before dawn and listened. The desert was still. No hoofbeats on the trail, no coyote calls, just the faint sound of wind brushing against the eaves. He rose and dressed without lighting a lamp, moving by memory. When he stepped outside, the sky was a deep navy, the stars just starting to fade. Willa was already up, pacing slow beneath the mesquite with Hope tucked against her shoulder. She wore the shawl again, faded now from washings, and her hair was braided tight against her neck. She didn't speak when he came near, but nodded once, her eyes steady. Walking her back to sleep, he asked, voice low. Colic, she said. She's been fussing since midnight. I tried fennel tea, it helped some. Isaiah rubbed the back of his neck. You need rest. I'll sleep when she does. He hesitated, then reached out. Let me take her. You go lie down a while, Willa blinked. You sure? I held my sister's boy through his first winter, learned a few tricks. She passed Hope over gently, and Isaiah cradled the child against his chest, her tiny fists balled near her chin, face flushed and restless. He began to hum, barely more than a breath, and shifted his weight back and forth. Willa watched, arms folding tightly across her ribs. You've got a way with her. Babies like rhythm, he said. It's the stillness they don't trust. Willa looked down. I used to think I'd be a poor mother. I was afraid I'd miss something or fail to protect her. Isaiah glanced at her. You didn't. She sat on the bottom porch step, her face turned away. When I left Sonoma, I had a letter in my pocket. Someone owed me a favor in Silver City. I was supposed to get there before June. What happened? The man who wrote it died last winter. I found out at the post stop near Yuma. After that, I didn't have a plan. Isaiah shifted Hope to his other arm. You do now, her voice broke just slightly. I don't know how to make one anymore. Every time I try, the ground moves out from under me. Then don't plan, he said. Build day by day. She looked up slowly. With what? With what's here. Hope let out a soft sigh and stilled. Isaiah looked down at her, then stepped forward and held her out. She's asleep. Willa stood and took her, brushing a kiss over the girl's brow. Thank you. Isaiah nodded. Go rest, I'll keep close. Willa went inside and the door shut behind her with a sigh. Isaiah stood alone on the porch, arms crossed tight, watching the light crawl over the distant hills. Later that afternoon, while he was cutting fence posts behind the north barn, Willa came to find him. She carried a folded paper in her hand and wore a borrowed hat to shade her face. Her steps were sure, even in the soft dust. I found this, she said, holding out the paper. It was in the bottom of my satchel. I forgot I had it. Isaiah took it and unfolded the page. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. A list of names and addresses, most crossed out. One remained, a widow in Las Cruces, someone her mother had known. I don't know if she's still there, Willa said, but I thought, if I could reach her, it might mean something. Isaiah studied the name. You want to go? I don't know yet, it's just a thought. He handed it back. You don't owe anyone your next step. She folded the paper again, slower this time. I don't want to leave Hope's safety to chance, but I also don't want to live waiting for someone to come claim what isn't theirs. Isaiah met her eyes. You don't have to run to be safe. You just have to stand somewhere that won't give, Willa's voice dropped. And what if I want to stand with you? Isaiah didn't look away. Then you're already where you need to be. She took a breath, then nodded once and turned back toward the bunkhouse. At the door, she paused. Isaiah, he looked up. Would you teach me how to mend fence properly? He gave a short nod. Start tomorrow, early. She smiled then, not wide but real. That night, as the wind shifted east and the scent of mesquite drifted low across the land, Isaiah sat beside the porch steps with Hope in his arms and Willa at his side. No words passed between them. They didn't need them. The weight of the child was warm and steady, and the woman beside him didn't look like she was waiting for a better place to be. And for the first time in years, Isaiah didn't feel like he was holding something borrowed. He felt like he was holding home. By early August, the worst of the heat had settled into a steady press against the land, the kind that made a man move slower and listen harder. Isaiah and Willa had fallen into a rhythm that didn't need naming. They worked the garden in the cooler hours, took turns tending to Hope, and made quiet repairs around the property as needed. It wasn't rushed. Nothing was. Even the days felt like they'd learned to breathe easier. One morning, Willa stepped outside with Hope wrapped snug on her back and a small cloth bundle in her hand. Isaiah was at the trough, draining the last of the silted water from the bottom so he could scrub it clean. I found these in the shed, she said, opening the bundle to reveal a few broken buttons and a scrap of blue calico. Your sister leave these behind. Isaiah rinsed his hands and dried them on his pant leg. Could be. She passed through last spring on her way north. Tends to leave things behind when she's in a hurry. Willa ran her thumb over the fabric. I was thinking of stitching it into a new sunbonnet for Hope. She'll need one if we're going to keep working outside. He nodded. She's getting bigger. Almost too big for that basket. You want a cradle built? I've got some pine planks in the loft. Willa's brows lifted slightly. You do that? Isaiah looked at her, the sun catching in the curve of her cheek. Course I would. She paused. I never thought I'd have a man offer to build a cradle for my child. He stepped closer, voice low. That man knew what he lost when he let you walk. No, she said, but I know what I found. They stood still, eyes locked until Hope stirred and let out a soft coo. Willa smiled and adjusted the wrap. She's ready for her nap. Isaiah reached out, gently brushing his fingers against the girl's tiny foot. I'll start the cradle this afternoon. Willa nodded, and Isaiah went to the barn, already measuring in his mind by dusk the cradle was half done. Isaiah carved the side panels with a steady hand, shaping a curve that would rock easy without tipping. He didn't rush it. Some things deserved patience. That night, Willa brought over 2 tin plates cornbread and beans she'd cooked on the coals behind the bunkhouse. They ate on the porch, Hope asleep inside, a moth circling the lantern between them. She smiled today, Willa said. Isaiah looked up. Hope, she did, just for a second. I was holding her after feeding and she looked right at me and smiled. He let the quiet stretch between them before replying. That's the kind of thing a man remembers for the rest of his life. Willa set her plate aside. Isaiah, I've been thinking about staying. He didn't move. You'd be welcome. I mean more than that, I want to make a life here with you, if you'll have us. Isaiah stared out into the dark, then turned to her, his voice even. I've been waiting to hear you say that. She reached for his hand and he took it. No hesitation. Just the solid warmth of fingers laced together. Over the next week, they gathered what they needed to make the house more of a home. Isaiah moved his things into the extra room of the big house, with Willa and Hope settling in beside him. He built a second shelf for the kitchen, and Willa started a jar of pickled onions on the windowsill. She hung washed linens from the line strung between 2 cottonwoods, and Hope began to recognize the sound of Isaiah's boots before he stepped through the door. One morning, the widow in Las Cruces sent a letter back, kind but brief. She'd moved to Texas years ago and had no ties left in New Mexico. Willa folded the note and tucked it into the back of the cupboard, untouched by regret. That door's closed, she said. And I'm not looking for another. Isaiah wrapped his arm around her waist. You don't need one. You've got walls and a roof and two people who love you. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You're sure you want this, me, her? All of it? I'm sure. They were married under the cottonwood trees in late September. The ranch owner brought a preacher from Benson, and Isaiah's sister returned just in time, bringing a quilt she'd stitched from old shirts and flour sacks. Hope wore a soft white dress Willa had sewn by candlelight, and Isaiah wore his father's vest, brushed and mended at the seams. The vows were simple. No flourishes, no crowd. Just two people standing firm under a sky that had watched them both survive. That night, after the others had gone and the moon hung heavy above the hills, Willa lay beside Isaiah in the quiet of their room. Hope slept in the cradle he'd built, the one with her name carved in small, careful letters along the base. Willa traced Isaiah's hand with her fingers. You've given me more than I ever hoped for. He turned toward her, his voice low. You've given me peace. I didn't think I'd ever feel that again. She kissed him then, not with urgency, but with the knowing gentleness of someone who'd waited long enough to understand what love truly required. Outside, the wind had settled. The land lay still, bathed in the hush of contentment, and in that quiet nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. Just a woman, a man, and the child who had carried them both toward something whole.